Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to you. My name is Sharma Banerjee, and I'm the Senior Editor at Nimbus 90. And we're delighted to welcome you to our latest episode of our Summer Networking series, which is In Conversation with Digital Leaders. We're delighted that you are joining us this morning. This series is all about getting a front row glimpse into the IT strategies of industry leaders and disruptors, looking at how they build their digital advantage, as well as giving you the chance to discuss your challenges with experts from Equinix. So before we kick off, just a reminder that there is a Q&A box at the right of your screen. Please do put any questions that you have for our panelists into that box. We will try and get through as many as we can. And don't feel like you have to wait until the end of the session. Do put those questions in as they come to you. So before I introduce our speakers, I'd love to invite everyone to click into the poll function on the right of your screen. It's next to that Q&A box. We will have poll questions coming up there, and we will dig into the results of those poll questions later on in the session. So today we are hearing from Steve Gibbins. He is the head of network services at Jaguar Land Rover. He has led that network function at JLL, and previously he led solution architecture at Yorkshire Water, where he successfully delivered the contact center transformation program. And previous to that, he led all aspects of data and voice communication systems and infrastructure security at Premier Farnell, and has experience across different industries. So Steve, great to have you with us this morning. Thanks for joining.
No problem.
So I'll now hand over to Lorraine Wilkinson. She is the VP of Sales UK at Equinix, and she'll be chairing the discussion. Lorraine has been a key member of Equinix UK's leadership team and is responsible for implementing and progressing Equinix's sales strategy in the UK, developing existing customer relationships and supporting long-term acquisition of new customers. So Lorraine, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we're delighted to have you. I'll hand over to you now for the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Shama, and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. One of the great things about working for Equinix is the opportunity to talk to people from a wide variety of industries. And I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking to someone from such a prestigious global brand as Jaguar Land Rover this morning. So thank you, Steve, for joining us. Now, to get the conversation started, I'd like to start with our first question. Whilst digital transformation is certainly not new, I think in the past 15 months, we've all been impacted in both our personal and our business lives with unprecedented disruption. So to start this conversation, can you share with us some of the shifts you have experienced in your business as a result of this situation? And can you share, have you seen any acceleration in your transformation roadmap as a result?
Okay, so morning everybody. So I think, as an organisation, we probably haven't seen anything different to many other organisations. The shift of the obvious challenges around working from home and what that brought to us with regard to the challenges that introduced. My background, obviously, delivering network services for Jaguar Land Rover, meaning that we're traditionally a very office-orientated organisation, and for good reason, because of the way that our business is run. Clearly, you can't build cars from home, and a lot of the engineering side of the business with product development, etc., is something that we do in our central engineering facilities. But that said, the organisation made that shift very effectively. We had some bumps in the road. I'm sure many other organisations did in the early stages, trying to scale up some services that we've used to a relatively large degree in the past, but taking it to the extreme from a let's say from my perspective, from a connectivity perspective, that clearly created a few challenges, but nothing that we couldn't overcome in a fairly short period of time. With regards to our sort of transformation roadmap, the whole automotive industry is going through major transformation. Nobody will be, unfamiliar with that with regard to electrification and the connected car that is really the products that that's developing more and more. So ultimately, nothing has derailed our overall strategy. It just means that we've had to adopt some different ways of working to continue the pace of change and some of the innovation that's taking place at the time around how our products are developing for the future. So ultimately, we've reshaped, we've regrouped, and we've carried on as we were previously with our transformation roadmaps. The key thing now is that now we're returning to a level of normality. What we're going back to is not what we were previously. So again, from my perspective, from a networking perspective, there's some stuff we need to do for where we are now when we've come out of this. So when you look at connectivity perspective, when we went to the extreme of lockdown, we sort of turned our networks inside out. All the traffic and stuff that we would see transit in our networks was still there. It was just coming from a different direction, and now we've got to balance that out as to how we see that for the future. Make sure that we right size our infrastructure, and make sure that we continue to deliver some fairly demanding services that we have to make sure work first time and reliably every day.
Yeah, and just thinking about that actually, in terms of what you're saying, I mean the actual, I like that term, turning the service that we're providing inside out. That everybody still needed the connectivity, but it was coming from a different place. I mean, just picking up on that specifically, if you think about the importance of collaboration within your organization, the business needed you to do something different. They needed you to make that pivot and actually continue to deliver the service, an always on service effectively, so that that the business could continue. So have you seen the role of IT change in the past months, and has it become more important or maybe even more valued as a consequence of what we've just been through?
I think it has. I think there's been an appreciation of what IT had to do as to make sure that the organisation and our business continue to operate. But in parallel to that, there was a dependency and a reliance on IT that's been growing anyway in our organisation. You look at our traditional, in the automotive industry, cars were traditionally electrical and mechanical engineering. That was the forefront of product development. Now, a lot more software driven. There's a lot more technology within our vehicles, which means that IT becomes a more integral part. So whilst IT may have been something that obviously played an important part and ran a lot of the systems in the background, we're becoming closer to the product that we actually deliver to our end customers, and IT is becoming an important part of that. So they've sort of come together, where the reliance and the importance of IT has grown from an organisation perspective, but what's happened over the last 12 months has obviously highlighted and intensified that dependency and view of where IT play their part in our organisation. So yeah, I think it will continue to grow. We see that now. Whilst we look at what our organisation is doing and the route that it's taking, IT is something that's growing and developing and becoming much closer to the business, or parts of the business where traditionally we probably didn't have that direct relationship, particularly when we look at our manufacturing plants and again product engineering, which is we have things like a lot more software development that takes part in that in that space. No, that's very interesting, and I think that the transformation in the automotive industry, particularly with autonomous cars, autonomous vehicles, is something that's really kind of pushing the need for IT really out to the edge. And kind of thinking about that, the way Equinix views organisation is with an IT core and an edge, and obviously edge is different for different organisations. And just thinking about it in the context of you, I can kind of see
cars being at the edge of, kind of your infrastructure, but how you're connecting the edge and the core, and how you're optimizing these connections and making them efficient is what will really make the difference, I think. Can you share with us an insight into how you're thinking about providing that, that service from the edge to the core and from the core to the edge?
It's a good question, because certainly if we talk about things like edge compute, and what part that plays in our sort of future strategies, then yes, it's going to be part, and it's going to be a really important part. Our products can be anywhere in the world. So when we look at how our products are developing, then edge compute becomes an important part of our strategy moving forward. But ultimately, if you think about what we are driven as an IT organization to deliver, and it's there's two main things. It's the speed and agility, and one thing of it is around, and again, talking around networking specifically, talking about the challenges of becoming or delivering a product that has a greater dependence on connectivity, then the speed element becomes a key question, and that's where we have to look at what sits at the core, what sits at the edge, and where those services are best placed to deliver the service to our end customers. And that's something that we're exploring. We don't have all the answers to that at the moment, but I think we know where we need to go and what we need to achieve in that space. But secondly, if we talk about the edge and core capability, it's the agility, and it's the ability to scale and adapt in both those environments quickly. And if we look at it from a networking perspective, if you look at what's happened around networking services, you look in the hosting world, you look at end user devices, the speed in which services can change or be delivered has transformed in the sense of cloud services, for example, and how services can be spun up and delivered very quickly at the core. And then when you look at the edge, and then you look at our client devices, or whatever we see as edge devices, they need to be, from a security perspective particularly, they have to be maintained and fed and watered quickly, and that puts demand on networking. So when you look at the piece in the middle, which is networks, and look at traditionally how networks are developed, we are slightly behind the curve as to where automation has been delivered at the core around centralized hosting services, for example, and what happens out with end user devices. The agility is there, but in the networking is quite static still. So you can imagine that if you take a really good example would be, if you have something hosted in a virtual world, you can spin up and deliver core services quickly. You can spin up a server in seconds. You can deploy applications within minutes, and the same applies at the edge. But if you look at the networking piece in between, and particularly bear in mind the security and the wrap that has to be around that, when those buttons are pushed to deliver those services, and then you look at the networking in between, and particularly in our world, it's a very complex state from a connectivity perspective. It's very static, and whilst it's very reliable, it's very stable, when you try to change something, you're going back to a very traditional method where you've got engineers sat at a command line interface typing in configuration, and when you look at the network space where you have multiple vendors playing parts in different areas of it, it means that the agility is not there, and you can spin up a service within arguably minutes, but then take weeks to deliver the connectivity. And that's what's got to change, and that's where we're looking at the automation, what we need to do in the network space to catch up to what's happened around us, to make sure that we can deliver at speed, we can deliver reliably at speed, and we can make sure that we are converging the control of where we've got pockets of network infrastructure that might be potentially managed by a different service or different function, where traditionally, for example, you might have a WAN operator managing your wide area network. You might have a LAN management service that it's done independently, and also elements of shadow IT that could be in part playing a part of that as well. So you've got to look at how do you address that agility element of it, which is, again, it goes back to the tooling. What is the capability that you have to overlay over that to create that that automation and that agility to be able to to deliver that at speed.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I'm absolutely certain many of the people listening on this call, irrespective of industry, are facing exactly the same challenge. So really interesting insights there, Steve. And as I think about it specifically, one of the I mean, the business will want to have their connectivity provided on an always-on service. We know that that's been critical. But have you been thinking about, as you move stuff out to the edge, about on-demand services? Kind of looking at spinning up capability when and where it's needed, as opposed to always being connected.
Yes, is the simple answer. The answer is not quite so simple, or the solution, sorry. Where I think, again, if you look back at how networking services are managed on a day-by-day basis for things like capacity management, you look back, and what you would have is some fairly basic tooling that would actually just do trend analysis. You would look at a trajectory in the past of what network growth is, and you'd see these nice pretty graphs that would say you were heading in one direction, and then you could do some capacity management to say that, okay, if I'm following this same trajectory, I'm going to run out of bandwidth or capacity at a given point in the future, and then you can forecast how that would be upgraded in line with that. If you look at our traffic patterns now on our networks, it doesn't look anything like that. There'll be something there that's got a huge demand on the network, and then the next minute it's gone. So it's just very spiky, it's very random, and it's something that we can't ultimately use those traditional methods of managing capacity across our network. So it's back to how do we deliver that on an on-demand basis, and that is certainly where we need to be, and that's where we're going. We'll make sure that where we have, I suppose, if you look in our organisation, if you look at our manufacturing space, then they need to deliver and build vehicles rock solid underpinning network infrastructure that will be reliable and do what it says on the tin. So they're not interested in what's happening in that space, they just want it to work. If you look at our product engineering space, it's they're innovators, and they are looking for solutions, and sometimes they're a couple of steps ahead of us, and they are stretching the capacity of IT and technology, and therefore we've got to make sure that we've got those scalable and flexible services that we can meet the demand of an innovation environment. So it's two polar ends of the spectrum, where we've got manufacturing that are almost a completely different customer to us from an IT perspective. We've got to make sure we deliver absolutely rock solid, robust, highly resilient services that absolutely will not fail. And then in the innovation world, whilst that still has to be absolutely reliable and stable, there's a level of scalability that needs to exist in there because of the nature of what they do, from a connectivity perspective, which goes back to, where we look at on-demand services, where, again, if you look at how vehicles are developed and engineered and tested, there's all sorts of challenges in that space where, telemetry data is being collected from vehicles on huge, vast amounts. Now, that might be going through a development cycle where suddenly there's a huge demand on collection of telemetry data, and then that might scale away. So you don't want to leave all that burning lots of cash in the background when we're not utilizing those services. So that goes back to how we connect, and that's how we look at cloud services, how we connect into the cloud, making sure that we're delivering that on on a demand basis, but making sure that it's it's optimized from a cost perspective.
Yeah, and I think the thing that probably leads me on to my next question, actually, which is excuse me, really around flexible IT and the ecosystems of partners that you need to support your key priorities for a business, perhaps means a shift from CapEx in the terms of how you spend your budgets towards OpEx, which kind of in line with what you were just saying about not having money, kind of sunk into something when it's really not being used. And I think life is no longer about buying and provisioning IT into the data center, but it's about having it available when and where it's needed. So going forward, do you plan do you think you'll plan your spend cycles in like a 6-month period or a year? And do you feel like you are you are able to be more agile now in terms of how you think about the changes and what you need to adapt as a business to be in a position to be more flexible?
I think from a plan perspective, I don't think we do anything different from many other organisations. We look at short, medium, long-term strategy, and and make sure that we meet the demands in those 3 criteria. I think the thing that we've adopted over recent years is traditionally IT and technology transformation is project driven. There's a business case and there is a requirement, and then you're delivering IT infrastructure to support that, or IT solutions and services. And what that ultimately means is you can be in a position where you're doing heavy lift IT transformation. And again, in my world, it might be LAN infrastructure refresh. It could be a wireless transformation program, wide area network services transformation, whatever that might be. But over recent years, we've taken the approach that we've moved to a product management concept. So what that is ultimately meaning in simple terms, that I have a set of product managers that own all the network services in a set of 12 towers in those services, and it's split up between the basics of LAN, WAN, Wi-Fi, network security, passive infrastructures in there as well, and and all those are mapped. And if the product managers are doing their job correctly, what we are doing is moving away from heavy lift IT transformation, and we're turning that into an evergreen cycle. So we're introducing transformation into lifecycle management. We will roll in new technology. We're in touch with the business. We know where technology needs to be at the forefront, and where we can manage the asset refreshes, if you like, or whatever services that we're looking at, making sure that it's targeted at the right areas of the business at the right time, and ultimately resulting in that when the business is ready then to make a strategic change, or there's a direction that they're going, we've already rolled out the technology at a deeper level. The platform is already there. We're not doing IT transformation when the business is trying to transform at the same time. We should be 2 steps ahead of that, and that's where we take the IT transformation, put it into product roadmaps, and the product managers then manage that. So hopefully they become 2 steps ahead, and we're rolling out those services in front of those those requirements from the business, and it simplifies what the business has to do. They don't have to worry about some of the IT transformational challenges that could be wrapped up in their programs, and it's the capability and the services is there for them when it's when they need it.
Yeah, no, that makes a great deal of sense. And I think so effectively you see that more as like a planned CapEx spend over a period of time, which kind of manages keeps the environment in an evergreen state, so that you're not having to do these major projects where everything's hit we kind of like hit a wall, everything's end of life at the same time, and then there's a need for a major project. Yeah, that makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah.
So can I just, before we move into the last couple of questions, can I just remind everybody on the call that there is the ability for you to also add questions for Steve into the chat. In the panel on the right-hand side, there's a Q&A box. I can see one or two people have already started to add questions, so thank you for that. And just a quick reminder about the polls. There's a couple of questions in there, again, in the same area under polls, if you would like to tick on that, because we can discuss that at the end. So thank you for that. So Steve, I think my last question is really looking towards the future. And how do you see the future of the business evolving and changing? And what are you going to need from partners and service providers to make this possible?
Good question, and I think from my perspective, it's the collaboration of different service providers that will be able to support what we've just talked about there around the automation and around the convergence of our, again, talk about network services specifically, the convergence of all those different technologies that have been managed almost independently in the past. Might be different vendors or might be different functions that pull all those together. So if you look at it from a convergence perspective, we have network convergence coming from three different directions, I suppose. So if we think about IT networks and OT networks, and OT networks basically our operational technology that's out in the plants, it's always been separated and they operate independently. The development of IoT and Industry 4.0 means that now OT networks need to be connected to IT, so they need to be joined, and there's a big challenge around us being able to do that securely and and from an operational perspective. So we've got that coming from one direction, from convergence. Then we look at again, that good the example of LAN and WAN traditional management done by different organizations potentially. If we want to introduce automation across our IT estate, they need to be orchestrated from a single platform. So we can't have this separation because the networks are now too complex. We can't have somebody operating one part of it, somebody operating another part of it. They need to be orchestrated and delivered as one, and they have to be able to understand our end-to-end connectivity. If you look in the network space for us, we have parts of our organization that are well understood, or parts of our network infrastructure, by one part, one function, and then another, understanding another element of it. LAN and WAN again being the example. So we'd need better collaboration. So we, as the customer, get a complete solution, that traverses all of those network connectivity services. It could be 5G, could be Wi-Fi, could be LAN, WAN, could be any of those, but it has to be all encompassing, orchestrated as one service to deliver that, that automation layer and all the intent-based networking. And then thirdly, there's the I suppose the shadow IT that we would call it, but it's basically IT that's out in the business. It's there for very good reason, but because of the raised importance on things like security and the lack of ability to deploy some of the tooling that we have centrally, it means that these pockets of IT services have to be centralized so they can benefit from the centralized tooling. So, and again, from our partners and who we work closely with, we need them to come along on that journey with us and be able to unpick some of these services that we're coming across and being able to bring them into a centralized service, but continue to allow it to be agile. It's back to that, the agility. When you get back to these big, huge, complex operating models and technology that's complex, it becomes rigid and static, and that's where we've got to balance around where we might take a relatively simple bit of IT that might be, like I say, classed as shadow, but it's there for good reason, bringing it into a central service that might arguably make it way more secure and everything else, but actually locks it in to be very static. So yeah, it's really working with our partners to make sure that we come up with the right solutions and it means that there's better collaboration that needs to be between those partners, rather than us being the linchpin that brings it all together. That needs to come together in front of us so we can can consume those services end to end.
Yeah, that make again, that's really interesting. I've often used the analogy that you need to be working with partners, and pardon the pun, but looking through the windscreen rather than always through the rearview mirror. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. You need to work with partners who are visionary, who can actually be on board with what you're trying to achieve, and collaborate with each other so that you can actually achieve your goals and objectives, which I think is, I personally think that's critical for everybody. Steve, really great conversation. Really enjoyed the points you've made. I think it's been really, like I said earlier, I think it's been really relevant, not only to people who are in the automotive industry, but many industries who are thinking about the challenges of transforming network and creating this agile environment that is certainly on your agenda. So I'd like us to pass back to Shama for us to take a look at the polls, and then maybe see if we have any questions for Steve or I in the chat.
Perfect. Thanks, Lorraine. So let's have a look at the polls. We put those in the chat at the beginning of this session, and if you would like to find them and look at the results with us, you can click into that yourself. If you go into the Fireside chat bar on the right hand side of your screen and then click polls, you can see the results of that. So if we just dive into some of these results, the first question we were looking at: which of the following is the most important to your business in the next 12 months? We had IT cost optimization, developing the hybrid working model, return to the office, and incorporating more virtualized services, network and or infrastructure. And then all of the above, which is perhaps a bit of a cheat answer, but that has actually got most of the results. So most people kind of on this call have been looking at actually all of those working together, and prioritizing all of those to deliver kind of business in the next 12 months. So Steve, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on those results, or how priority those elements work in your business. Yeah,
I think I'd probably answered exactly the same. We are challenging. Cost optimization was a big focus for us for the last 12 months for obvious reasons. There was periods of times where we couldn't build cars, so there was a huge focus on that, and that's continued. As we come out of this, we've got other challenges now that the whole industry and other industries are suffering from chip shortages and all sorts of things. So cost optimization is right up there, and we run a program of work across the organization that is continually looking at that cost optimization and making sure that is part of everybody's daily working mindsets, that looking at, am I spending the money at the right place at the right time, and getting every bang for the buck that that we're investing. So that's really important. We talked about that, the hybrid ways of working. That's exactly where we are. We're looking at how that's going to be a working model moving forward, and then back to what we talked about just now about being more agile, which is a key incorporated service where we need to virtualize lots of network services to do that, and infrastructure. So I'd have done exactly the same. I'd said all of them. Yeah.
Fab. The next question, we were looking at the transformation journey. So we asked everyone, how would you describe your digital transformation journey? Beginning, maturing, or advanced? And I think encouragingly, we've got most of the respondents sitting in that middle maturing category, with a couple of people kind of on either side, beginning and advanced. So with that in mind, Lorraine and Steve, I don't know if you have any thoughts on what the next steps are for those organizations that are in that maturing phase. How can they move up into that next stage of advanced?
Well, I would say for me, transformation isn't a point in time. It's not a project. It's not something that has an end state. It's continual. Transformation should be in the mindset of everybody, continually. So I would say would you ever get into that advanced level? I would say, you can have the processes and if you look at it as to how you approach transformation, then to get to the advanced, or what we would class as advanced, I would say that is just how you operate as an organization. It's the mindset, it's the ways of working, that if everybody comes to work with that mindset of transformation, then, that is, probably where, we need to be. That's where I would argue, that would be where you could say we're advanced in that journey. But you'll never get to an end of a transformation journey. You would always you'd either be somewhere in the middle. Hopefully you should never be at the start of it. You should be right in the middle of it all the time, and looking what the next transformation challenge is going to be, which is back to the point around what we talked about earlier around creating that evergreen environment where you are looking and you're introducing new technology and transformation initiatives all the time. And then you don't get to this point where you've got these huge heavy lift programs of work that's gone and delivered. Everybody breathes a big sigh of relief when it's done, and then sits and waits for the next big challenge. It's just chipping away at that all the time.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that, Steve. I think it's, as organizations, we always need to be learning, to be taking on new ideas. And the second we think we're advanced in our thinking, and we are mature in what we're doing, I think at that point, you stop growing, you stop developing. And so completely agree with you. And that the evergreen analogy was at the front of my mind when that question was asked. So completely agree.
Agreed. I was thinking I'd written evergreen and circled it lots of times. So I think that's a really good takeaway for everyone. Coming on to the final point then, I think, Steve, this really echoes exactly what you kicked off the conversation with just how important the IT function has become. So we asked attendees, has IT become a more important focus in your business in the last 12 months? And 83% of people said yes, resoundingly. So Lorraine, I don't know if you've got thoughts around that in response to what Steve kind of kicked off the conversation with earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, Steve, when you said, when you had to pivot the business, every single function within the business had to find a way to work differently. And you were at the center of all of that. It was the networking, it was the critical element, being able to achieve that, being able to work remotely from, all the different parts of the business and all the different locations in the world was an incredible thing to do. And I as a direct result of that, I am sure the business, not only has IT become more important to your business, but the business will have really appreciated what you do for them. So, no doubt, IT has become more important and will continue to become more important as you move into this more agile way of working, in order to deliver the transformation that the business journey is on.
Definitely. And we've just had someone come through on the chat saying, totally agree with you, Lorraine. A shift in mindset is key for all. So definitely, I think that is agreed with. So thank you both for your thoughts on the poll. We've got a few questions coming in on the Q&A, so I'll just quickly pick some out of that. And please do, if you're listening, do feel free to keep adding questions in. We'll try and get through as many as we can. So we've got a question that's coming from Mark Sims. So Mark, thank you for adding this. This is a really interesting one. He asks, if you had a magic wand, how would you solve the challenge of transporting the huge amounts of data that is generated on a modern connected car somewhere so that it can meaningfully provide insights? So Steve, I'll hand over to you for that one.
Well, I suppose it goes back to the question around, edge versus core. And and what's done where, what's done on board on a vehicle, what's done off board, and where that data is best placed. And if we look at the way that the connected car technology is developing, what we traditionally do on engineering vehicles to develop a product is ultimately, in some cases, going to end up on a customer vehicle just to provide a better service, a better level of being able to monitor and and feed and water our products once they're out in the in the big wide world. So I don't think there's a single solution to that. I don't think there's a one fits all. It's looking at where data can be best processed, and again, it goes back to, looking at edge compute service, which I think is going to be a really important part of our future, where traditionally we would be backhauling huge volumes of data around networks, and that introduces many challenges when it comes to connected car, because you're then reliant on, I suppose, connectivity elements that you don't have immediate control of when you get out to the edge, and there's different cars of vehicles in this instance in different parts of the world. They'll have a different experience. So it's looking at where those services can be optimized to, I suppose, reduce the amount of unnecessary transfer of data, how it can be stripped and distilled, in some cases, processed and distilled down to meaningful data as close to its source as possible. So, yeah, I think it's it is a real challenge, but we've got some really smart people working on that as a solution. But I'd love to say there was a magic wand to actually find an answer to that, but yeah, I think it's going to be a complex solution. There's going to be many different use cases, particularly when you separate what you would see from a safety perspective. Particularly when you start talking about the automation that's been put into vehicles. There's a safety aspect around reliability, connectivity, through to the softer services at the other end, which might be customer experience, massively important. But with that removal of safety, there's some tolerances that can be accepted that simply can't be at the other end. So that's where there's going to be many different challenges in that space.
Definitely, and I think that that links back to another question that's come through, and just in terms of connecting all of that. Another question has come through around the interaction collaboration between manufacturers in developing connected car technologies. What would you say is the central glue so that we don't end up with a series of different languages in that kind of collaborative space?
Oh, it's a good question. Whether I could answer that is another question. But I suppose there is a level of collaboration across the industry that is addressing that. How that is done, down at in the detail, it's not something that I could answer the question to, but I know that is it's a good question that that is a challenge. But the automotive industry are working to make sure that there are standards that are absolutely adhered to make sure that these connected cars, so to speak, all talk the same language, because there's so many things. It's mind-boggling actually what a connected vehicle can do, and it's very reliant on some of the peripheral devices that they might potentially communicate to in the future. So it's absolutely there as a question that absolutely has to be or a challenge that has to be met, and addressed. So all I can say is, I know that there's a lot of work to make sure that there is absolutely coherent standards to make sure that doesn't become a problem in the future.
Definitely. We have time, I think, for one really last quick question, and Lorraine and Steve, I'd like to pose it to both of you. This question has come through around talent and skills. So are you facing challenges? Oh, sorry, it's just gone. Are you facing challenges with talent and skills in your IT teams, and how do you address that?
I think I suppose in my teams, so we have an operating model where we have a core. And for me, it's our product team. So we have a centralized capability, but then we rely on partners. So but we're seen as one team. Right? That's a really important thing that we drive as a way of working. That we see all our network service providers. We don't see them as service providers in that sense. We see them as part of our team. We are delivering. If we're facing the business, look at the business, we expect them to look at us as a JLR, a team within JLR, alongside all the technology service providers, and we deliver one service to them. So there is an element of reliance we have on our partners to make sure that we've got the right talent, the right skill sets, and in some respects it makes it a little bit easier when you're reliant on service providers for that, because they will be, I suppose, serving multiple customers, so their technology and resource pools are larger, and they're arguably, they operate in very different environments, so they can bring a lot of value, to you centrally, as a team that's trying to deliver something to an organisation like ourselves. So, we face, I suppose, the challenge is striking a balance. What should be insourced and what should be outsourced, and that's where I think our main challenge is as we adapt into this new world of automated networking, etc. What do we control, and what do we have as a central service, and what do we rely on our partners to deliver for us? And and today, there's it works. It's not perfect. I don't think anybody can say that it's perfect in any way, but I think we've got the balance, and we've got a roadmap for the future where we will be growing our centralized IT teams to support the future. But the skills and the talent is there. We've just got to place it in the right places.
Great. Well, we're sadly out of time, Steve. Thank you so much for all of those insights that you've shared. I think there's been a lot of kind of takeaways that everyone listening can take into their own organisation. So thank you so much for a fascinating discussion.
No problem.
And Lorraine, thank you as well for chairing that discussion. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Shama. Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate it.